So, good day. Welcome to Talking Smart Conversations with Colleagues in Education and Philosophy from around the world. I'm your host, Richard Morehouse. Today's guest is Professor Anne Santiago. Anne Santiago is completed her bachelor's degree in psychology at Viterbo University in 1988. She did her master's in political science at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Upon completing her MA, Anne worked as an agriculture and extension volunteer for the U.S. Peace Corps in Mauritania.
Mauritania.
Thank you. West Africa. She did her Ph.D. at the University of Maryland in 2000. Her dissertation was entitled "The Road
It's 12 hours.
to Developing or Continuing Crisis, ? Structural Adjustments and Political Changes in Sub-Sahara Africa." Anne did her as an associate professor and former chair of the Department of Political Science and Global Affairs at Portland University. Her official biography at the university states that she brings a reckless generosity to her teaching and service at the University of Portland, touting UP as a institute where she can try out new courses, serve communities generously, and go the extra mile for students. Professor Santiago encourages students to understand their own perspectives and those of others, and encourages students to confront their comforting intersections where perspectives clash. Prior to finding a permanent position at the University of Portland, Dr. Santiago worked for USAID and USAID grants relating to helping to rebuild the University of Rwanda from 2000 to 2004 in helping professionals to utilize technology in advancing peaceful coexistence in African nations. Since the fall of 1924, Professor Santiago has led the campus initiative promoting nonviolent dialogues in diverse public spaces. In this, Professor Santiago leads the university-wide effort to foster civil discord amid polarizing and particularly around election, global conflict, and identity-based issues. A full biography can be found when this thing will be posted. So,
fantastic.
Thank you very much, Anne. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
I always fumble reading through all these silly things.
I always laugh because it makes me sound so good. I'm like, oh, look how awesome I am.
Well, yeah. Anyway, we kind of know what we're going to talk about. Public confession that I didn't record the first conversation that we had, but we're rolling now, so hopefully this will all work. Now, we talked about three big issues before, and we're going to basically address the same three issues, and they kind of deal with the whole growth from one discipline to another and how you manage all of that stuff from psychology to political science to international affairs. And then the other one, or one of the other ones, is basically around the issue of humanities within a kind of social science oriented world. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about your work at the university with the dialogue across campus. So with that in mind, here's the way I looked at it. Your road to international studies appears, from an outsider's perspective, to look unusual. Can you talk a little bit about the thinking process that helped you get from studying into international affairs, particularly since you started working in or studying psychology?
Hmm. Yeah. So, I went to Catholic high school in La Crosse, Aquinas, and I think of high school as, at least certainly back in the 80s, it's like a delivery mechanism of information, right? And so I was interested in a lot of things. I was a curious kid. I grew up in that era of kids going out and exploring the world. So I felt pretty free in being able to do that on sort of a personal level. But at the same time, like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had taken a course in high school in psychology, and I'm like, okay, psychology is interesting, right? I think at that age, a lot of people think, oh, I need to understand myself, right? Like, I need to understand people around me. And I was also very shy and pretty reserved in high school, in college as well. Um, so I declared a psychology major, chose Viterbo because it was small, and I liked that. And I think what Viterbo did for me is sort of expose me to the idea of asking questions and the idea of complexity in a way that certainly high school doesn't. And I hope all undergraduate institutions do that, right? So I really loved psychology, and I really loved neuroscience actually, but I was not great at science. So I didn't think I had a path forward in that. At least, you know, my self-confidence was certainly not there. But then towards the latter half of my time at Viterbo, I started paying more attention to what was going on in the world. And in particular, um, human rights issues were really big. And especially the connection between US foreign policy and interventions in what was going on in Latin America. And I thought, like, criminies, what is going on? Why is my government doing this? Wanting to understand that. And so I pivoted, thinking I really would rather study this bigger phenomenon and try to understand what my government was doing and why, right? Because we grow up with this mythology of the United States as being this grand, wonderful um, entity in the world. And, I was totally disappointed. And I'm like, I want to study this. So I pivoted and ended up at University of Nebraska, had applied to several schools. They gave me money. And I lucked out because there was a human rights theorist at the University of Nebraska by the name of David Forsyth. And so I got to study with him and really sort of delve into the theory, which, interestingly enough, growing up Catholic, there's a lot of Catholic social teaching that's aligned with sort of universal human rights, the idea of dignity of the human person, and the fact that, individuals should be able to develop their own person in a way that's free from harm, all those kinds of things. So um, that was very appealing to me. But by the time I finished at Nebraska, I was kind of done with school for a little bit. So I decided I was going to apply for the Peace Corps because I had really always been interested in going somewhere non-Western. And while I was at Nebraska, I was also introduced to an anthropologist who worked in Southern Africa. So I was really fascinated by his work and by just the opportunity to go somewhere so very foreign to my own culture. I had also happened to speak some French in high school and college. I took courses, and so I said French speaking Africa, and that's what I got, right? So I ended up in Mauritania, West Africa, doing agriculture extension, but mostly sitting around doing exchanges of culture with people and trying to figure out who I am and what my life was all about, right? Um, so there I made, some really good friends. I thought maybe I'll do development work. But I also realized that I am not the most patient person in the world. And the idea of working in another culture where the Western sort of ways of doing things with efficiencies are not the way of the rest of the world, right? And so I didn't think I would be really a great fit for that. So I went back to grad school, ended up at University of Maryland, where they also funded me, and I got to work with a conflict theorist by the name of Ted Robert Gurr. So he, in the 60s and 70s, was really one of the key original conflict thinkers as to sort of big, complex, why do we get to the place where violence happens when there's conflicts in the world, right? Um, and interestingly, he also studied psychology as an undergrad at Reed College, which is out here in Portland. Um, and so a lot of what he did was an intersection of sort of global studies, trying to understand like structures, systems, states, but also social groups and the psychology of individuals. So that was his model for trying to understand conflict. So that was super exciting for me. I gained so much knowledge there. And then just as I was finishing, the University of Maryland got a USAID grant to work with the National University of Rwanda in Butare. And they tapped me to be the conflict management coordinator. So again, like my whole story is, oh, well, this door opened, that window opened, let's go here, let's go there. But all of it really, um, I would say, intersected nicely and complemented everything that I learned, sort of complemented everything else. Um, and I would have stayed in school forever. I love, like I love learning. It's a fabulous characteristic that humans have, that we have this ability to seek knowledge and be curious. So I'll stop there.
Yes, I'll ask you because I'm just kind of interested in the beginnings, but particularly since we had some connections back then, and with understanding and getting your perspective kind of on uh, what stood out in terms of any of the psychology courses or incidents in psychology that were really stays with you. Maybe that's the best thing to think about. Uh,
Yeah. I think maybe like the human development piece, right? What humans are capable of at different stages and why things change in our lives. Um, like I said, that trying to understand the brain and how much influence that has on our actions is something that's really, really interesting to me, like the philosophy of mind stuff. Uh, I find that fascinating. Um, I am also like really fascinated by not Freud's work in and of itself, but the influence that Freud has had on the world, and how that sort of like how different um, thinkers really capture the imagination of people at different times. Um, so, there's so many things. Like I can even point to in grad school reading Frantz Fanon for the first time. He's the West Indian psychiatrist who did his work in he did his clinical work in France, and then they sent him to Algeria during the war, and he developed some really striking sort of theories about how um, both, the colonized and the colonizer are damaged by the whole process of colonization, and how, and having gone to the African continent and thinking about development and that kind of thing, like the psychological impacts of colonization in addition to the political and economic impacts, I think they're fascinating. So all of it connects, it's really interesting.
it is, and I'm fascinated. It's just interesting that you talk about that because one of the people that I have been reading for a long time is Albert Camus.
Uh-huh.
Of course, his Algerian French experience and always being an outsider in France.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yeah. I mean, it's so human beings are so complex, right? But so social, that the intersection of those two, the individual and the social, is really fascinating.
and again, I don't know if this was any a part of your education, but one of the things that I have been struggling with, or personally I've been sorting through, is Jerome Bruner. Uh,
Okay, no.
oh,
Tell me more.
oh well, he's a guy that kind of invented the cognitive revolution.
Okay.
Started Head Start, among other things. He was one of the people behind the starting
Okay.
Head Start, and anyway, he is. Well, I'm seeing, I'm looking at, this is one of his
Okay.
anthologies, and here he is as an old guy. Uh, uh, he lived to be almost lived, I think, a couple of days short of 100.
Wow.
And anyway, he's just fascinating in terms of that kind of intellectual development. And he moved from sort of individual understanding of brain to the whole narrative understanding of and the role of stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Moved from a very scientific to a much.
Yeah.
So anyway, but anyway, that, and it is interesting in terms of they all being connected, because even though you haven't read much of Bruner, probably, you have a lot of the same issues that you were dealing with in terms of all of those things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just a fascinating sidebar, I guess. But um, oh, no, that's and then the one of the things that we were looking at is the connection between the individual and the universal, between the local and the international, in terms of
Yeah.
how all of that stuff fits in, and especially around areas of conflict and intersection.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to talk about that a little bit in terms of your work or your ideas.
Yeah. Um, on one level, everything's interconnected, right? And impacts what happens somewhere else in the world impacts us. But on an individual level, we don't always feel that, right? Um, and I'm thinking like with the Rwanda genocide, just as an example, I can pretty easily trace the history of how we went from the people living on their own prior to the Europeans coming to what the Europeans did while they were there to what it looked like at independence and why we ended up with genocide, right? Um, you can kind of easily trace that in terms of power dynamics and greed and sort of hierarchies of societies and the stories we tell ourselves about our own superiority and other people's inferiority. Um, but I remember being in Rwanda one time with another University of Maryland professor, and he wanted to track the conflict like moment to moment, almost like track where all of the different killings were happening, and to do so in a way to try to um, say this is how it unfolded and this is why, right? The why behind it. And at one level, I remember arguing with him. I'm like, you can't explain this in a why. Like, you're not going to explain the why behind it on one level because this is insanity, right? For a people to mass kill another people. There's a level of insanity there that I think in some ways is inexplicable. Um, but the impacts of that on the individual people there, the region, sort of how the rest of the world reacted to it or didn't react to it, and then the guilt after and the pouring in of aid in the aftermath of it. Um, it's really interesting to see because there's a lot of psychology, I think, that goes into all of that, all of the decision making along the way, right? Um, and just as an example too, like in many um, mass killings like that, the way that you get people to act is you demonize the other, right? And so a call went out over the radios, talking about how you need to kill this particular group, otherwise they're coming after you. And if you don't, then we're going to kill you. And they're cockroaches anyways, and so you need to destroy them, right? Um, so I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but I think the impacts of what happens somewhere across the world really do impact larger forces in a way that we don't always think about.
Yeah. And but I think the other thing about that, and I think um, is that tragedies always happen to individual people.
Yeah, yeah,
They don't happen to the society in some important ways.
right.
And yet they're all a part of the same piece.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you could bring that back to the US and our history of racism here, right? And how that is targeted at the level of group, but it's the individuals that have specific experiences with it, right? And not all those experiences are the same.
Right, right. And yet there is a kind of universality with those experiences. And we talked a little bit about that, but it's some ways it's the unique why it's one of the reasons why it's important to focus on the uniqueness of individual experiences is because there's a grain of connectivity in those pieces that are
Yeah.
most individual. Yeah. It's so interesting because I just got this morning and an article that I'm reviewing for a journal, which is called "Being There: Community Psychological Education After October 7th."
Mm,
October 7th being the
right. Attack in Israel.
yes, yes, and
Yeah.
so they're doing this little piece and kind of doing. I don't know. It's part of the problem I'm having with writing in response to it. It's a very interesting article, but sort of doesn't fit into a lot of ways of thinking about it because they really did this through a process of journal keeping and all kinds
Mm,
of other thing that, but it deals with that whole issue about, I mean, that is such a Rwanda-like situation in some ways, and yet it's about as far away from it as you could get while doing
right.
the same thing.
Yeah.
And, and that's what fascinates me, and how you understand the depth of something by looking at individual cases.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
Anyway, that's a part of the. Um, oh yeah. Oh, and this was we haven't talked about this at all, but very little. And that is how artificial intelligence
Mm,
interfaces with deep learning.
hmm.
Um, and so, any thoughts about that in terms of your own teaching experience?
Um, I'm a novice when it comes to my understanding of that. You might want to interview my spouse, though. He's long had a career in AI, and he's very well versed in that, right? From my understanding is that um, what AI is good at is, summarizing, responding to prompts, and um, organizing, right? But according to my spouse, it cannot reason.
Mm,
It has not yet cross that threshold. And that's like the thing that a lot of people are going after right now, getting it to actually reason on its own. It can learn, right? But it's all about providing the prompts and the information to learn from. It can seek information, but it apparently can't do reasoning that like 6-year-olds can do. So there's a big gap, I think, between where we're at and I think maybe where some tech people would like to be. And I'm okay with that. I'm I'm a little scared of uh, technology without regulation, I guess I would say. I think we as a species have maybe taken our capacity to make really amazing things and not considered the consequences of those. It's for me a little bit of hubris, like, oh, because we can do this, we will do this, right? The atomic bomb is something that, just jumps to my mind. And why have we not gotten rid of them? Because guess what? They're really, really bad. Um, so for me, like that's the hubris of human beings being able to do amazing things.
Yeah, well, part of what I'm thinking about that you probably have, well, what does AI do to human memory and to human conversation?
Mm,
That's where my interest is, and I think in some ways, I don't know if you're dealing with that directly, but I think that also relates to your project about how do people talk to each other because a part of the issue I think with AI is that if we have answers, is what AI provides,
hmm.
doesn't provide any of the process and the phrase that I'm beginning to explore in more detailed is that what AI does not have and perhaps never can have is the arc of life.
Mm,
And so understanding the accident of birth and the inevitability of death is
yeah, yeah,
beyond what a computer can do because it's only outside and there's no inside.
right.
But that's that.
And
But
there's no emotion, right? I
right.
mean, I think that's one of the interesting things. Like I think about the dialogue piece. There have been some studies that show that people who are maybe prone to conspiracies, for example, if you have them sit and interact with AI in a logical way, in a space where they don't feel judged, they can recognize, oh, you're right, this conspiracy theory actually doesn't hold truthfully. But if you try to do that with another human, people get on to be on the defensive because they feel like they're being judged, right? So that's really an interesting piece of that AI capacity that I find fascinating related to sort of people's emotional intelligence or, you know, um, capacity to admit that they don't understand, whereas they don't really want to do that with other humans.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and I think, and this is what and I so maybe I'm asking questions of myself, maybe more than you, but what I've been fascinating by is that, and I only know this basically through reading about it because I haven't experienced that, but we know that young kids have grown up with talking dogs
Mm,
that are, I mean, dogs that are trained to be pets, uh,
yeah,
and dolls that talk to each other and can be consoled and my sense is that that has this really quite profound effect on human communication. So anyway,
yeah.
that's a
Well,
question.
I think for sure. And not just AI, but all technology has definitely had an impact on human attention spans,
Oh, yes.
which I think is really problematic. How can you do, both deep interactions with other people and deep thinking if you can't pay attention for more than like 7 minutes at a time?
So have you had experience with students having a difficult time reading full books and large text?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've almost gotten to the point of not really assigning serious academic texts except in my upper division courses. Because I know students won't read it. What I had always done for an accountability was to have students do reading reflections. So that way I would know that they're reading, because I'm not really a huge fan of exams, because I'm not really a huge fan of students just learning to take exams.
Right.
But trying to do reading for me, grading weekly reflections, 25 to 50 students, depending on what my semester looks like. That gets to be a lot as an accountability mechanism. Um, so yeah, it is challenging.
Yeah. And and I'm what I've been reading is people have said, well, uh, given the right circumstances, students are still capable of reading entire books. In fact, multiple books in a semester. But we've talked our way into buying their bit.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know. And it's certainly for me and not for them to sort of decrease the amount of reading, because I find it really challenging to pull it out of them.
Yes, yes. Well, this is a long time. I mean, I want an example, and it's been a while since most of my teaching ended before all of AI and AI writing in particular came in. But when I taught a graduate course in developmental psychology at St. Mary's in Winona, uh, actually it was in the Rochester campus, but I always started with women's ways of knowing. And as uh, uh, a way of immersing and thinking. And what we did was we had we spent the first couple of weeks basically where the students would read a couple of chapters at a time, and then they would try to sort out self, mind, and voice and figure out what that meant and
Hmm.
do kind of group presentations on that. And I found that what that was then is a template for them challenging other difficult texts because they had
Mm,
kind of a way of going about that.
right.
And I don't, I mean, I'm talking too much here because it's supposed to be a conversation.
No, it's good.
Uh, uh, I just was wondering about if you had some ways that you've been working to get students to do more of the deep thinking than, and maybe you can connect that with our final topic kind of about the program that you're working with now in terms of,
Sure.
uh, you know,
Yeah, I mean, I do still like a lot of reflection. I think students just writing about what they're thinking is a good way to help them keep thinking, right? Um, and with the sort of approach of trying to get more dialogue on campus, part of it is an attempt to just ask good questions. I think that's an important piece. And also, the way I explain to students is if you're going to be interested in and actually carry out like dialogue rather than debate or something, you have to start with yourself because you need to understand the why behind the what of what you believe or what you think, right? And it's interesting because there's a psychology professor here who I've worked with some on our um, first year experience kind of thing.
Mhm.
And he, he says that, well, students are already self-absorbed and they think about themselves too much. And I think that's, in some ways true. We have the selfie culture, where people continuously like need to show who they are in whatever space they're in. But I think that's also a very shallow sense of self, right? So I I go through sort of this process of with students like, and this goes to sort of this um, book that I'm trying to write, right? And I talk to them about, okay, so what are your beliefs and why do you believe them and where did they come from, right? And what influences came to give you those beliefs? And then I do the same with like experiences, right? Like what have been your experiences that have influenced both your identity, your belief system, how do your experiences and culture interact with each other, right? And so it's a much more, I think, complex kind of understanding of the self, so that students can then say, okay, so all of these influences went into what I believe about X, right? The nature of racism or something. So now let's think about somebody else. If you want to have a dialogue with that person, if maybe they think differently than you need to also understand that those same forces shaped that person into how they think about racism, right? So just as an example, I'm teaching a class on perspectives on social justice right now, and I show this film. It's called White Right, and it's by a filmmaker named Dia Khan. She's a British filmmaker, um, but she went on BBC and talked about like being a multicultural society. And after that, she got all this hate mail, a lot of it from the US white supremacist culture. And so her approach was, wow, where is this coming from? I need to understand this. And so she went and pretty much embedded herself with some white nationalist groups who allowed her to come and film, right? And ask these really, really poignant questions. And she sat and she listened, and then she asked another question. And the very first time I showed this film, um, back several years ago, it was sort of the height of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. I remember distinctly one of my students saying, "I can't believe she did that. She shouldn't have to go and try to understand what these white supremacists are talking about." And I said, "No, she doesn't have to do that. This was her choice. Like this was her individual autonomy saying, wow, this is crazy what's coming at me. Why is that? Why are people doing this, right?" And so she wanted to understand it. And she put this film together that really shows like you can get at some of these things. She was very respectful of the people and their views. They were spewing really terrible stuff, not at her, but just sort of their general ideology. But she really got at like, what are these underlying factors that led them to this place to think in this way, right? Um, and so I sort of tell students about that, and I'm like, I'm not asking you to go embed yourself with the white supremacists, right? Like, I'm not asking you to put yourself in danger or even like even try to um, have empathy for these people, right? What I want you to do is be able to understand that the same forces that shape you also shaped them. Um, and it doesn't make what they think right, right? but it does help you to get at the why are there such differences? Why is there so much lack of agreement on even, simpler things like what are the best policies that we should enact in Portland to service the homeless population, right?
Yeah.
It's not an easy answer. It's complex, right?
Well, and one of the things, I don't know if you know Diane Kuhn's work. She's done stuff. One of them is called, well, she's done maybe the nature of argument. I could, let's see. Oh, the skill of argument. One of the things that she talks about in that book, though, is I've really kind of taken to heart. And when she asked people to look at issues, say like the homeless, one of the questions that she will ask is, "How long have you thought that?"
Mm,
And the knee-jerk reaction is to say, "Always."
yeah, yeah,
But if a person doesn't get past, "How long have you thought that?" And actually think about what the beginning was,
yeah,
then that's a harder argument to make if they can't get to that point to
right,
realize that that happened at maybe not one time, but at some times. Uh,
right.
and so,
Yeah,
and
that's interesting. There's also a professor, I can't remember what college she's at. Her name is Loretta J. Ross. She was an activist in from the early 70s in the women's rights movement. Um, and she's written a book called Calling In, because she said what she saw was the people even within sort of the progressive movement infighting because they didn't agree on 100% on everything on the way to go forward, for example. And she's like, we need to do better at bringing each other in, and we don't have to have 100% agreement on everything. But one of the questions she asks is, so why do you think that way, right? How
yeah,
long do you think have you thought that way is another one. And there's all these, I think, questions to get people to think more deeply about why they have the views that they do. Because I don't think we're trained to spend that much time in self-reflection, right?
yeah, I think that's very true. Um, so you hinted back to your book. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking of this. It came from actually this social justice class that I've been teaching forever. And part of it was just an understanding that students don't know history really well. I think we teach American history really poorly in this country. It's so much more complex than the way that we teach it. And I think a big part of that is we have this mythology about America and what we stand for and what our exceptionalism and what our strengths are, right? And I think to give up that mythology um, would break apart a lot of people's sort of sense of who we are as a country. Um, so I thought, well, how can I talk about social justice without talking about social justice? That's kind of what I want to do. And I've been working on this sort of framework, which I think is Anne's understanding of why people come to worldviews that they come to, right? Um, and it's those four characteristics: belief, identity, culture, and experience, and they're all undergirded by myth, right? So at a personal level, we are shaped by identity, belief, culture, experiences, and maybe some myths that we tell ourselves about that. Like, just as an example, I'm a white Midwestern girl. Maybe one of my underlying sort of mythologies is conformity is good, because we like things to be a certain way. Um, but that also translates to the group level. So at the national level, we also have beliefs, identities, cultures, and experiences, much more varied, but they're also underlined by myth. So in this book that I've been writing, I'm taking sort of the American story and trying to bring in some counter examples to what we get as the usual narrative about who we are, and show how these four factors led to a particular narrative and how other narratives should also be in place. And then I'm going to talk about five different social justice areas from the same perspective, like labor rights, right? What is the mythology that we have about that? What's the process of how that came about? What are the identities that we tell ourselves about laborers, versus other people who are not laborers, but they work in white collar jobs or whatever it might be. So that's the book project, and really, like, I think of it as being written for my people, these maybe undereducated, hardworking, not very sophisticated knowledge of history and culture from all over small town America.
Well, and I think about, you talk about your own kind of personal mythology, and it's easy to buy the mythology of the counterculture as well.
Yeah, yeah,
And like labor unions are good, and of
yeah,
course, yeah, but labor unions are very complex.
yes,
Leaders are very complex, and Cesar Chavez was a wonderful organizer, but he was
yep,
probably also a pretty terrible person from what we can understand now.
right,
And 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 that was true of Thomas Jefferson as well. And so we have this complexity of human nature in goodness and evil all wrapped up in uh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So
So yeah, and I really think of this book as, like, I put a bunch of my own personal examples in, as to how I came to sort of the worldview I'm at, and I want it to be sort of a way for other people to use it to understand themselves and the society that we live in through this model.
and I don't know how this fits in, but one of the things that with the civil rights movement and all kinds of other things, there's lots of music that goes along with it.
Mm, yeah.
And and uh, I remember listening to the Clancy brothers, Irish folk singers,
Uh-huh.
and one of the lines that he's introducing his song was, "Well, we never cared much for King Billy," and I realized he's talking about William of Orange, and
Oh,
and so what he's doing with this song is bringing
yeah.
back what 400 years, well, what 1056 or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever that 1044 I think it is, but anyway, um so that those myths are kept alive in so many interesting ways, and so
Yep.
many ways that are both so nourishing and also so flawed, and it's just and I don't know where I'm going with that except to say that we do have to get at both understanding our myths and being richly understand,
Yeah.
which is very, very complex. But anyway,
Yeah.
so do you have any any closing thoughts about our very rambling and my dominated conversation here?
Yeah, that's sort of my brain, like, just
Um,
everything everywhere. Um I mean, I guess, like, for me, all of the thinking I've done since, probably since undergrad through the present, it just leads me more and more to uh I think the worldview that we need to have humility and give grace to other people. Um, Sometimes I feel like I'm an apologist for the human condition, and other times I feel like, you know, I want to escape to a cave and never interact with another human again. Um, so it's just such a it's hard to be human, right? And for me, like I like to understand how things work, why things work the way they do. But the older I get, the more I also kind of fall back a little bit on like just philosophy. And, you know, I don't think we can understand everything. And I'm coming to terms with the fact that there's so much complexity and I'm okay with not understanding everything.
Yes, 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 yeah. Yeah, and coupled with the fact that we have, I think, as humans, this insatiable um, need to try to understand everything,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
fully realizing that we don't understand. Uh, well, I mean, I'm so impressed by people who are have this breadth of knowledge, and that's one of the reasons I like Jerry Bruner because
yeah. I'll
I
have to
think
check him out.
yeah, yeah, do. And this is not a bad place to start. This is pulls together. It's a two-volume thing called In Search of Pedagogy, and
Okay.
it has a lot of book chapters and essays. But they really kind of form a whole. That's as a place to start. And the other place to start is called In Search of Mind: Essays and
Okay.
Autobiography, um, which is really quite fun, I think.
Hmm.
I used to teach that when I taught history and systems as one of the courses, and because, well, he's a fascinating dude. Ended up his long career teaching in the law school at NYU,
Ah,
uh, because of the role of narrative in law.
okay. Did you teach philosophy of mind or psychology of mind at Viterbo?
I taught history and systems is the closest thing I did.
Okay.
Um, yeah. And developmental psych, we did a lot of that too.
Right. Right.
But did somebody teach that? Did you have that
I
course?
want to say that I took a philosophy of mind class, but maybe it was in philosophy department. I don't know.
God, I mean, uh, it's I don't even remember all the courses I
I
taught.
know. Right? It
Possible
gets
that.
hard.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, well, thank you, Anne, for this
yeah, thank you. It was
wide-ranging
wonderful.